Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Better Call Saul Season 6, Episode 11, Breaking Bad. This video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Better Call Saul, so I have to start with a spoiler warning for Better Call Saul up to Season 6. Episode 11, if you have not seen up to this point, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. So, last week, it was funny. I want to talk a bit about my review for last week's episode, because when I made it, I said, yeah, this episode is fine, but it's not great, because I saw these reviews that people loved it, and I was like, it's okay, I just don't see the big deal out of it, and I think it was actually a bit of a disappointment after the episode before it, which was so amazing. And it's so funny, the responses I got. I immediately got a whole bunch of responses from opposite ends. Like, I think equal amounts of people on both sides. On one side was saying, you're being too kind in this episode. It sucks. It was horrible. It was boring. It was a waste of time. It was the worst episode of the show. And then you got the other side saying, you just don't get it. This episode's a masterpiece. It was amazing. It's a brilliant storytelling. It's got so much meaning. It's one of the best episodes of the show. And it's funny because I lied in the middle, sort of, and it's like that was a very polarizing episode. Some people loved it, some people hated it, and people compared it to The Fly, which the episode of Breaking Bad, which is kind of an apt comparison because that's also a very polarizing episode. Some people saying that's the best, some people saying it's the worst. But unlike The Fly, I thought this episode was good. I thought it was okay, where I think The Fly is by a long shot the very worst episode of Breaking Bad. In fact, if I ever did a top 10 worst episodes of my favorite shows, it would crack it. Like, I think it's one of the worst episodes I've ever seen from a good show ever. And I'm not being superficial. In fact, I could make a whole essay, because I've seen people's essays about why it's so brilliant, and I think they're wrong. And I could make my own essay about why it's actually shit, because the characters are completely out of characters, the metaphors are forced, and the comedy is totally out of place. But anyway, I'm not here to talk about The Fly. But, yeah, I just go out in a rage about that episode. So I don't think the comparison is that perfect, because, you know, at least last week's episode didn't suck. But anyway, I'm here to talk about this episode, Breaking Bad, which I think is clearly the better episode. It's clearly better than last week's episode, and now I'm starting to gain interest in this Gene storyline, which frankly last week's episode, it was, as I said, it was fine, it was okay, but I wasn't really interested to see more of the Gene storyline. In fact, when we got back from the intro and I saw that we were going back to the Gene storyline, I'm like, again, do we have to? But then it actually got good. Like, I think this is the better episode, not just because it featured Walter White and Jesse Pinkman, and not just because it had scenes from the Breaking Bad time period, which is what I said that I wanted, but I think the metaphors are stronger, it works better, the story makes a lot more sense, it was just more interesting, and I do love the juxtaposition of the Breaking Bad scenes compared to the Gene scenes, and how they're sort of, they tell the story of how he's making a huge mistake that will ruin his life, and that he's doing the same thing over again. And I think it's fucking brilliant the way that they compared these two things. And yeah, so I think it's much more powerful than last week's episode, and I was much more interested in it. So let's talk about this. So the first scene is and I love how basically a lot of these scenes, because it's funny, because this episode is called Breaking Bad, and there was an episode of Breaking Bad called Better Call Saul, so it's only turned around that there's an episode of Better Call Saul called Breaking Bad. But the scenes we get in this episode are from the Breaking Bad episode Better Call Saul. So that adds an extra element of irony, which I love. But we mostly see from other perspectives stuff outside of that episode, which I love. Like we start with him in the RV being driven to the desert, which we didn't see because we just saw them, put him in the car, and then we see them arrive at the desert. But here we see him on his way freaking out, and he takes out and they have him shout out, "It wasn't me, it was Ignacio." So for all those people who are just watching the show and not going on the internet and watching all these YouTube videos or making YouTube videos or reading all these articles about for the past 6 years about, what does he mean by that? People are just watching the damn show, which to be young again, or to be innocent again, I should say, then that draws connection that, yes, Ignacio, that's why he said it wasn't me, it's Ignacio, which we already got earlier, but I think that was a nice little callback. And so I'm actually going to stay with this storyline for a bit, because then we get, we come back from the scene, which if you've seen Breaking Bad, you know what happens. And I feel like this latter half of the final season, you kind of need to have seen Breaking Bad to fully get it, which I think wasn't true for most of the show. Especially the Gene stuff, and this stuff particularly. I mean, you might be able to follow it if you've never seen Breaking Bad, but it definitely makes a lot more sense if you have. Because if you have, you know what happens, that that he convinced them. We found out that he thought they were the cartel, and he convinced them that they're not, and said, "Put $1 in my pocket, so I'll be your attorney," or whatever. And we see them come back from that when he's fucking around with all their equipment and figuring out that they do the blue meth, which again, it fills in some of the holes. But and then you got the classic, bickering back and forth between Walter White and Jesse Pinkman. The way they interacted was so true to how they interacted in season 2 of Breaking Bad. And how, they're bitching about each other. "Oh, you're going to flood the thing." And I was worried that they would do a whole other storyline about the battery going dead and being stuck in the desert, which was a whole another episode of Breaking Bad, in my opinion. The second worst episode of Breaking Bad, but again, other people think it's brilliant. But, that's, again, a sidebar. Anyway, but I actually really like this scene because, Jesse Pinkman asks, "Who's Lalo?" Which I love that, because that's one of the lines he had, and they didn't show that in this episode. Again, that's why you need to see Breaking Bad, because when he says it wasn't me, it was Ignacio, and they're like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "What, Lalo didn't send you?" And they're like, "Who's Lalo?" And that's when he realizes it's not the cartel. So, having seen Better Call Saul, we now know who Lalo is. Which is kind of amazing. I do like how Jesse Pinkman asked about that, who is this guy that you think is trying to kill you, that you're so terrified of? And he's like, "Don't worry about it." Obviously not trying to think about him. Yeah, and it does show sort of how, demented he's become, and how different he is than the Jimmy McGill that we knew of Better Call Saul, and how he's a bit more greedy and prideful and whatnot. So one thing I want to quickly add is I'm sure some people are going to complain about the fact that Aaron Paul is in his 40s and is playing a character who is in his early 20s, and they're like, "Oh God, he looks so old, it looks dumb." I don't give a shit. I've made my peace with this show a long time ago, that this takes place a long time ago, and people age. Mike looks like he's in his 70s or 80s in Better Call Saul, which takes place before Breaking Bad. When in Breaking Bad, he looked like he was in his 50s or 60s. So he looks clearly older, much older. And Better Call Saul was supposed to be taking place 10 or so years before Breaking Bad. So I've gotten over the fact that people just fucking age. So who cares? And then we go for forward to the scene where he meets with Mike, and again, their relationship is great. And it's curious that Mike is still doing all this private detective work for him, even though he is full on working as Gus's right hand man at this stage. But I don't know exactly, and it's funny because Saul even refers to him as he who will not be named, which means he is aware of Gus. Which I don't know, because in Breaking Bad, when Mike started like threatening to break his legs and shit, it seems like he wasn't aware that Mike was also working for Gus and thought of him as just his PI. So I think that maybe breaks things a little bit, but maybe not. I don't know. It's not that big of a deal either way. But anyway, so Mike brings up the information about Heisenberg and tells him who he is and where he works, which we saw in the episode Better Call Saul. He showed up at Walter White's school, and he's like, "Oh my God, how'd you find me?" And now we know it was Mike. Which, later from watching later seasons of the show, you could probably put that together anyway. And Mike is warning him off, saying that's a bad idea. It's amateur hour. He's going to end up shot or arrested, and you don't want to go anywhere near it. And it turns out, as always, Mike is correct. He's wise. He knows what he's talking about. But the gains, the greed, all Saul can see is this huge opportunity to get in on the ground floor of a huge crime lord who's capable of making tons and tons of money, which, worked out well for him for a couple of years, but as Mike predicted, didn't last. And so he's saying, don't do this. And he's just like, oh, I'll take it on advisement or whatever. Now, let me jump back to the Gene storyline where we see him talking to Francesca, and this was a great scene. I fucking love this scene, though. And it started off with Francesca being like a landlord or whatever, which is cool to see what she's up to. And she's, of course, just as bitter as ever. He gives her all this money to get her to, tell her situation, what's going on. Oh, and I love the fucking sign that the guy, Bill Oakley, I believe his name was, the district, the DA guy, who I fucking love that character throughout the Better Call Saul, that he has his own firm now and that he's a defense attorney. When I saw that, I was like, yes. Although, she did mention she told Saul outright that it wasn't. I like, she said, it was like, oh, he's gone to the other side. And she's like, oh, so he came out. He's like, no, he's not gay. He's a defense attorney. Which I think is kind of funny, but I kind of wish they didn't even hammer that point home. I wish they would have just left it as that sign and as a nice little Easter egg. God, I love that guy. I hope we see him again, but probably not. But but anyway, he asks how the heat is, and she tells him, yes, the heat's very hot because, he's like, oh, I thought it would gone away after, Walter White bought the farm, referring to his death, and she was like, no, if anything, it made it worse because his wife made a deal, and so they can't find, so they shifted their focus towards him and Jesse Pinkman, and they found Jesse Pinkman's car at the Mexican border, so figured that he fled, so now that all their focus is on him. Which is a reference to Gran Torino, because that's something they did as a fake out. They put, I think the disappear egg, it was actually his idea. I know that earlier in the movie, Badger drove it down there, maybe, but I think the disappear went along with that and had him send postcards from Mexico or whatever to again get that impression, so the authorities thought he was in Mexico when in fact he went to Alaska. So yeah, he went to Alaska, But he faked it out so that the authorities think he went to Mexico. So I like that reference. That was a cool reference. But then the big bombshell was dropped when she said that Kim had called her and asked about him after all this all went down. And so this made him think, oh, that Kim still cares about me. And now we see him call the operator to try to get the place where Kim works. I guess he knew that from before he had to go into hiding, that he knew that where Kim maybe looked her up or something and know that she moved to Florida, and called his work. Now, they do an interesting trick here, and I gotta say, I hope there's a reason for why they're withholding this information. Because they take us out of the phone booth where we don't hear what he's saying. We only hear the traffic, but we see his reaction, and he's not reacting well. He's getting really upset, and in fact, he slams the phone down several times and even smashes the glass of the phone booth. And at first I was like, why are there still phone booths? But then I remember this is actually taking place in, like, I'm not sure exactly when. It's like, someone would probably correct me. It's like 2011, 2012 or something like that, or maybe even 2010. And they still had phone booths back then, if I recall. But anyway, so yeah, so something must have happened that really, really, really fucking pissed him off. Like, I made him enraged. Now, the first thought would be to think that he talked to Kim and she gave him a very negative reaction. It's like, I don't want to talk to you, don't call me, I don't care about you, and hung up on him, which is a possibility, but it's also a possibility that he never did speak to Kim. That the person that he was speaking to said that she disappeared, or she doesn't work there anymore, and they have no way to contact her, and that's why he got so pissed off he broke the glass or whatever. Maybe. We don't know for sure. But I think there's a reason why we don't know this yet, why they're keeping this a bit in the vague, some having to do with what they're going to do next, because we have to see Kim again before the show ends. We just have to. But that was interesting that that he still has his feelings for her. So it seems like this incident, though, is the trigger for him wanting to get back in the crime life, because we saw in the previous episode he was like, went to the flashy suits and was like, nah, it's not for me. Meaning the whole point of the episode is that he's moved past being Saul Goodman or being the slipping Jimmy or having to run cons and get money, and that he's grown beyond that. But apparently, and that's why he told the taxi driver dude, it was like, we're done, say it, we're done. And so this, whatever happened with this thing with Kim, caused him to regress, caused a reversal where he wanted that sly life. That maybe, I think my guess would be, it made him more apathetic. It made him not give a shit, which is how he became Saul Goodman in the first place, as we saw with Better Call Saul. It's because of Kim leaving him, and he just didn't really give a shit about anything or anyone anymore, and just wanted money, money, money. And it seems like that is the exact same trigger here. Him not being able, or having a bad connection with Kim, whatever happened, is the trigger for him to be apathetic and not give a shit and just want money, money, money. So he goes back to the taxi driver and his friend, and it's like, it's back on. And they come up with this scheme to go out to bars. It's very, very reminiscent of Slipping Jimmy and the stuff we saw him pull in flashbacks with Marco. And he goes to, bars, gets people pissed drunk while he, just pockets the alcohol, make it look like he's drinking it, but he's not really. And then arranges for his taxi driver friend, to pick him up in the taxi. And there they have a water bottle. It's like, here, want some water? And it has drugs that knocks them out, and they're already pretty fucked up from all the alcohol. And and the taxi driver slips in a piece of tape on the door so that his friend can come in behind, open the door, take pictures of all their credit cards. And so no one's none the wiser. No one ever knew that they were there. They never knew the house was broken into, but alas, they get access to all their bank accounts and whatnot. So it's a pretty, as I said, it's a classic Slipping Jimmy scheme, and they keep running the same scheme over and over and over and over and over again, which is interesting. And I love we get some similarities between these scenes and the Breaking Bad scenes, because we see that massager thing that Gene buys, that foot massager thing, which I do remember from Breaking Bad. In fact, my biggest memory of that was when he was doing that thing and was, moving back and forth, and Mike comes in. That's when he threatened to break his leg, and when Saul tried to sit up, he was like, "No, you're good right there," and so he would loom over top of him. And so the scene we got with Mike was obviously the origins. Like the first time Mike saw him using that damn thing, is like, I'm not gonna talk. I'm either gonna stomp your foot or stomp your head in, and we're gonna leave. And so, which is cool. But anyway, so it was cool and it also shows that he's basically regressing exactly to how he was when he was Saul Goodman, as I said. And that was a good sign of that, a good sort of nice little hint. So then we get montages of the scheme, them running the scheme over and over and over again. It's working very well for them. We do see Carol Burnett, the taxi driver's mother, looking at the window at them going to the garage. So I do wonder if that factors into what's going to happen next somehow. So it seems like she's getting suspicious of what they're doing. But we see we see him, Gene or Saul, whatever, trying to pull a scheme with this guy who's actually really nice. Like the first time we saw him do this scheme, this guy was a total fucking asshole who was like making him do all these bets that he would lose purposely, and he was such a dickhead. And so when they stole money from him, you're like, oh, good, fuck that guy. But this time, and I love the juxtaposition. They show someone who's actually really nice, and we find out that he's dying from cancer. And I did honestly, I guess I'm the sucker here. You can make me the mark, but I actually thought that this would change Gene's mind, that he would be like, no, I'm not going to do this. This is a bridge too far. But instead, they took it the other way, which is very, very interesting. It shows how much he's regressed, and he went right back to being the despicable and scummy Saul Goodman, because their partner in crime, who's the one who actually breaks into the houses, refuses to do it because he saw the cancer pills, and it's like, this guy has cancer, so I don't feel right doing this. And Saul, Gene, whatever you want to call him, does not let it go. He's like, come on, you gotta go back there. And when the guy outright refuses, he's like, fine, you're fired. Get out of here. We don't need you. It just shows like he desperately wants to run these scams, and he's so desperate to do it. He's like, all right, he says to, I think Jeff is his name, the taxi driver, is like, we gotta go back there. And he's like, you sure? It's been 3 hours. The tape isn't even in the door anymore. Maybe he might wake up from the drugs. We don't know how long it'll affect him. He's like, don't worry about it. We'll be fine. And we see him go there, and he breaks the glass, which it goes totally against their what was working for them, because what was working for them is because no one ever knew they were there. No one ever knew the house was broken into, but he's flat out breaking the glass. And I love how this scene is juxtaposed with the scene of him going to the high school where Walter White works. Because that is the scene we got at the end of the Breaking Bad episode, Better Call Saul, where Saul shows up at his high school, and that's when he proposes to become his lawyer full time, to become the lawyer behind the crime lord. So that was the huge mistake that set everything off, that made him where he is now, as Gene, having to hide as a manager of a Cinnabon under an assumed name, and where everything went to shit because he did not heed Mike's advice, and because he just was greedy and saw the money and just wanted to, and that led him to his major downfall. And so that's exactly what he's doing here. He's not heeding the advice of the people he work with. Even Jeff is kind of iffy about it. He's like, oh, I don't know, maybe it's not such a good idea. And are you sure? And he's like, fine, let's do it. Because he's doesn't give a fuck, and he just sees the dollar signs, and he's doing something reckless. And I think it's very obvious that this is going to lead to his arrest. That he's going to get caught, because I'm pretty sure the guy is probably awake. That the drugs probably have worn off, and he breaks the window. Especially if you look at the preview for next week's episode, it just shows a police car, so it's kind of in black and white, so like it's in this time frame, implying that yes, he is going to get arrested, and no doubt that will lead to them discovering who he really is, and then he's probably going to be put in trial and for that. So his goose is cooked. So I think that maybe the final 2 episodes of the show might be them, like this trial or whatever, them trying to convict Saul Goodman of the crimes he did under Walter White. That's just my guess. I don't know for sure, but that's definitely the strong vibes I got from this episode, that this was his huge mistake, that he was doing the same. That's why they showed it side by side to where he introduced himself to Walter White, because it was the biggest mistake of his life that led to him his huge downfall, and what he's doing now is the same thing. A huge mistake of his life that's going to lead again to his downfall, to him finally getting caught. And I find that brilliant. I find this episode brilliant. As I said, it's definitely much better than last week's episode. So my rating for Breaking Bad, the episode, not the show, out of 10, I'm going to give this a 9 excellent. I think it's it was a really great episode. I don't know, I'm almost thinking 10, but I don't think it didn't quite reach the level of a 10 for me. It was almost there, but it's definitely a very strong 9. I thought this episode was brilliant in its metaphor. It made me interested in the Gene storyline, and now I am once again very interested to see what will happen next. So that's it for my review of Better Call Saul, Season 6, Episode 11. I shall return next week to cover the next 2 episodes of Better Call Saul. So be sure to check out my channel for that. Also check out my channel as I cover many more shows, such as all things Star Trek, Westworld, The Expanse, Star Wars Rebels, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.